say,
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
says donkey. What do you think people of Mogadishu are telling us?
You know, the Swahili have a better one, eh? Kwamba nguo ya kuomba haisitiri matako. Manake punda mwingine si wako, anaweza kukaitisha wakati wote. He or she can actually recall the donkey. It's not yours. In other words, you must learn to stand on your own two hind feet in life, because when you rely on others, there is no dependability guaranteed, and you just never know when that support might be withdrawn.
Well said. Well put.
Okay. Fantastic. So usually as we go into things, let's take it from the corporate world, that you will have a midterm review, you'll have a quarterly review, and you'll sit with your supervisor and they will say, tell us how you think you've done, and then we can weigh it against what we've seen you've delivered. This by-election that took place last week on the 27th of November was seen for many intents and purposes as a run-through, a dry run, a dress rehearsal for the IEBC, which is still brand new since May, June this year, in terms of what was going to happen in a general election. We have had by-elections in the country that would happen and nobody would even notice.
Yeah.
People go back to work. But this one had all the politicals against each other, really. But let's look at the role of the IEBC and how it was able to handle this. How would you score it?
Thank you. We will talk about, I hope we have an opportunity to talk about why the heightened activity. But in my own rating, and we are yet to do the post-by-election evaluation, which we are going to do this week, we did 95% as IEBC.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. What fuels that, or what informs that?
Because our assessment must be based, number one, on what it is that the Constitution dictates we must do to meet the threshold of what an election is contemplated under Article 81. And Article 81 insists that, number one, a by-election or an election must be one that is, number one, free. Free denotes the ability to have the citizens walk into the polling centers unhindered, without undue influence, and without unnecessary interruption, and cast their ballot. From where we sit, all the polling stations, at least where I sit, because I was in charge of Magarini, that was effected. The second tenet about an election is that that election must be by secret ballot. Again, in Magarini, as it was in many other areas where other commissioners may speak, we had elections that were conducted in secrecy. Transparency, that everything that was done in terms of how the elections was done transparently. For example, in terms of the opening of polling centers, the ballots, the ballot boxes, the agents were present, the observers were present, and all these undertakings were done in clear view of those accredited to observe. But most importantly, the officers who conducted the elections were properly trained. They took the oaths of secrecy, and they were able to conduct the election in strict accord with the Constitution, the Elections Act, and the regulations.
Okay.
Suffice to say that there is what was within the armpit of the IEBC, and it is on that basis that I give ourselves accolades of 95%. But there is obviously that was in the armpit of other state agencies.
Okay.
And that is where the 5%, in my view, ought to lie.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about the 5%, right? And when you talk about the 5% that you say was a miss, one would say that alone is a worrying call in terms of credibility of an election. Because you look at areas where there was violence. Let's take Kasipul, for instance, where people died.
Yes.
And one would ask the question, why would IEBC, that's independent, that you've said ought to have conducted the elections out and ensure that the constitution is respected, why not cancel that election? Because the people that ought to be represented are being killed. You know, we talk about Malava, where we saw individuals being beaten at night, and one, you've spoken in terms of access being unhindered, but people are being beaten at night, not being able to exercise their right to vote. One asks the question, can IEBC make the tough decision to call out individuals to cancel this election until that time when the commission is able to assure the citizens of this fair, unhindered access to cast their vote?
Thank you. We all agreed as a nation that we'll live by the dictates of the Constitution and the law. Part of that requirement is that where an allegation is raised, the due process must be followed, and any penalty must be predicated on the evidence availed. We received a complaint about Kasipul's violence. Mm-hmm. The committee duly constituted by the chairperson of the commission to deal with all disputes arising from that exercise, received the complaint, processed the complaint, and meted out a judgment based on the evidence that was received. It is regrettable that 2 lives were lost. But when making a decision on the basis of the 2 lives lost, you must have evidence incriminating directly these 2 particular candidates. We had no evidence to directly incriminate the 2 candidates. The evidence we had was that this violence occurred because these 2 candidates veered off their election campaign schedule. One was in the wrong place, and so was the other.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When the elections campaign schedule is not respected, these are the likely results, because people don't want to follow what they have been told to do, and therefore their supporters end up clashing.
Isn't that why the IEBC is there, Commissioner? Because this is the question. You've now noted twice that if people veer off their campaign schedule, number one, which is in direct contravention of the processes and policies of the IEBC, where do we hear the voice of the IEBC saying, hello guys, you veered off, stop, or bring the thing to a halt? We don't hear that, number one. Number two, in this case of chaos, at what level or what threshold of chaos needs to be met in order for the IEBC to say we're putting a plug in this thing until we're able to calm down, or we're putting a plug in it completely because we are not able to see this process through? When would that happen?
Yes. First of all, a correction. The IEBC voice was heard. It was heard because the complaint as received from Kasipul. By the way, these complaints were 2. Mr. Rocco filed a complaint against Boyd Were, and Boyd Were filed a complaint against Mr. Rocco. So these were complaints that were adversarial to each other. The decision that we made, in which we penalized them $1 million shillings each, in our view, was commensurate with the evidence that we have raised. You must, just a moment, you must also appreciate that whereas the committee is a quasi-judicial committee, quasi in the sense that it's not a fully judicial committee, the committee's decisions must also be predicated on lawful facts and lawful evidence, because eventually this matter is subject to an appeal.
Okay.
Now, so we have where we reach, and where we reached was the punishment that we meted. Thereafter, there were issues that came up during the hearing, which fall within the precinct of the National Police Service and hopefully, eventually, the ODPP. We already advised the National Police Service and advised the other state agencies that there are reasons for further investigation. Now, once we have reached there, really, IBC has dispensed its obligation to the greatest extent within the laws that govern our operations.
Allow me to ask the question a little bit differently.
Yes, please ask.
What did you use to determine that there was foul play prior to the by-election that would then determine a fine of 1 million shillings for both of these aspirants at the time? What was used to determine that they were guilty, essentially?
Number one, every candidate prior to the commencement of campaigns, they congregate before the returning officer in charge. And each one submits their schedule of campaigns, including the routes and the maps. Mm-hmm. All the 10 candidates in Kasipul met before RO and agreed on the routes that they will use, on the days and the dates. What IEBC does through the RO is to harmonize that campaign schedule. The harmonization is important because it helps avoid conflict situations between the supporters of the various candidates. Now, it is a requirement of law under the regulations that the candidates must keep and strictly adhere to this campaign schedule. So the violation that we established was that the candidates disrespected the agreed campaign schedule.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
That is the basis. And it is a basis because, as I've said, violence just doesn't happen in elections. There are triggers. And one such trigger is where the opposing camps meet at the same point. Clearly, it becomes a problem containing the safety of the people in that
And so
place.
then what must you do at that point when that happens? As IEBC, who's overseeing the election?
Thank you. When that happens and we get a report, because you can't act unless you have the report, we act first proactively, which our RO did, warned them. But beyond that, a complaint is filed. Because once a complaint is filed, you proceed on that basis. So yes, our ROs, because they're on the ground, they immediately and proactively go ahead and warn the candidates, look, we have these campaign schedules. We all must abide by it. If you do not abide by it, clearly we're going to cite you for a violation. And this is how this eventually was escalated into the case that we heard and determined, and we considered 1 million shillings a deterrent enough penalty. 1 million shillings is not little money by all standards.
One would say to those two individuals,
It's
a million
nothing.
shillings
It's a
is
slap
pocket
on the
change.
wrist.
But let's go to Malava, where on the night of the election, even the candidate himself, one Seth Panyako, came out, and we saw him on live TV shedding tears, claiming how there has been voter intimidation, how violence was meted on people and his supporters to make them not turn out to vote. At that particular point, with all these allegations, first of all, having noted that those who ought to vote, Kenyans who ought to exercise their right to vote and select those who would represent them, have been beaten at night. We saw images on social media of an individual who was stripped naked. You know, this one person would not come out to exercise their vote because of this psychological issues that they are going through, and that extrapolated to many others. One would ask the question, if IEBC is to ensure that elections are free, fair, and credible, that has happened at night. How then do you guarantee that that exercise has followed the Constitution if Kenyans are not able to come out to vote?
Thank you. Look, the images that came out of Malava, the images that came out of Kasipul, the images that came out of Mbere, for example, where some of the politicians were literally strangling a voter, presuming that he was a voter. Those are pictures that were not good for anyone in this country. We made a request to the National Police Service to investigate those incidents and handle them for what they are. The challenge, and which I realize that most Kenyans don't appreciate, is that they do not appreciate the fact that IEBC is the overall arbiter of election matters in this country and processes. However, in executing its mandate, IEBC relies on a multi-agency approach. IEBC does not have a police station of its own. IEBC does not have a DCI of its own. IEBC does not have NIS of its own. Neither do we have a military force.
Yeah.
Let me permit me to finish.
Okay.
So what ought to be appreciated is that there is what IBC can do, has to do, and there is what other state agencies have to do. Unfortunately, if they do not do it, IBC then receive the body blows. Let me give you an example. All those incidents that you've indicated are under active investigation by the police. Regrettably, the authority of IBC in terms of clamping down on these incidents runs from the time the election date is announced up to the time the elections are conducted. If these things, then the investigations by the police are not concluded within this time, it therefore becomes a post facto incident, and the proper forum for that now to be handled becomes the courts. And that is why 28 days after the gazettement of after the election victories or losses, IEBC cannot proceed, for instance, to resume voter registration in that area because that has not been settled.
Okay.
So right now, and for your information, while I was waiting to come in here, that gentleman, Seth Panyako, came out here, and the kind of interaction was not the best. It was not very pleasant, and understandably because of the emotions. So the violence that has been reported, the pictures that you saw, are all under the active realm of the police.
Yeah.
And I understand that these matters are moving to the election.
But,
courts.
Commissioner,
yes,
there are those who, because of the violence, because of fact that they were preparing to bury their kin, were unable to come out to participate in that election, which is their right.
yes.
And they would say, we are unable because we've seen our kin has been killed, our neighbors have been beaten up. We are unable to go because we are not assured of our security. What would you tell them? Because they were not able to choose their candidate. What do you tell them? How do you assure them that IEBC stood for them, that IEBC made a decision for candidates to be on that ballot, yet they were unable to participate?
Yes.
Because it boiled down to that individual Kenyan who was unable to exercise their right because of, remember, election is not an event, it is a process. And everything else that led to that day of casting vote is a process, including the violence.
I agree.
How do you tell them that the candidate that has been sworn in is your candidate?
Look, I agree that elections do not start on the polling day. Elections is actually a cycle that runs from the end of one election to the commencement of another election cycle. And therefore, all the processes, small, big, medium, are equally important in ensuring that the final outcome of the election is free, fair, transparent, in strict accord with Article 81. It is regrettable that our politicians have opted not to act very well in terms of how they handle themselves and how they handle their supporters when it comes to elections. It is not right that some of our political leadership opt to engage or allow their supporters to engage the way they do. And so, where a parent has lost a child, or where a citizen has been injured and maimed because of violence, it is not acceptable. It can never be acceptable.
And yet, it seems to be acceptable by the IEBC. Because if it
isn't.
wasn't, wouldn't we see that there would be a direct stop to this? For goodness sake, Commissioner, you talk about veering off the campaign schedule, and that warranted a penalty of 1 million shillings.
Yes.
But then on election day, people died. People were injured. There's a member of parliament who was bleeding from his head. There are people whose property was burnt. There are many factors pointing to an election that was not free and fair, and yet we don't see action against that. What it does is that it waters down the confidence that the people have in this body that is, according to you, the arbiter of elections. Does the IEBC actually have power? Does it?
Thank you. You know, I would like you to not adopt a microscopic view of this situation, but rather look at the holistic framework within which IEBC is operating. IEBC has condemned the violence. IEBC has asked the police to act. IEBC has penalized those particular cases of Kasipul
Prior to the election.
Precisely, prior to the election.
But that didn't stop that same kind of violence from occurring during the election, and nothing has been done about that. In that case, if you didn't need the police at some point before the election to levy this penalty on these two individuals, why are you now saying that you've given it to the police and you will wait for their report on things that were on things which were significantly worse during the election? This is the question. That if we don't look at it in a microscopic way, that we run the risk of looking at it generally and not pay attention to the details, which, as you know, is where the devil lies.
I want you to clarify this to me. Are you saying that what IEBC did in penalizing those particular gentlemen when the matter was brought to IEBC was not sufficient?
No, I'm saying it was sufficient. And if it happened at that level and you were penalizing $1 million shillings, when you see destruction and abuse happening in the actual election, then you should have been able to do a lot more. Okay. We can't have a conversation here and say that politicians are behaving badly when nothing has been done to stop that behavior.
Hold it. You, with respect, you're really sweeping. That's a very sweeping statement. When you have not done nothing, but at the same time you've said you've done something.
No, you said that you've asked the police to act.
That is part. The process of dealing must be holistic in the sense that what was brought to us, we handled. That's a fact, and you acknowledge. However, your discomfort seems to be that a lot more happened and we did nothing.
Yes.
Now, that a lot more that happened, for complaints that we received, we dealt. We received complaints that had zero evidence of what was happening. What we would rely on are the pictures that you also are relying on. And on the basis of those pictures and stories, we immediately instructed not instructed, we have no authority to instruct, but requested the Inspector General to help us apprehend those people, investigate, and bring them to book.
And that's going on right now?
That is going on.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, you see, we must be careful in the way we make some of these statements. I understand the emotions, but you must also be careful not to destroy IBC because you're lumping everything on the IBC laps. We have said that where complaints came to us, we dealt. Where things kept on spiraling, for example, in Kasipul, where the Honorable Kaluma was hit by a stone, and in Malava, where we saw gory pictures, our chairperson immediately called the IG and told him, look, this has to be sorted out. Please apprehend, please investigate, please prosecute. IEBC cannot move into that realm. The best IEBC can do is what we did. So it is not fair to say we did nothing. What is fair is to say that things spiraled, but there was no obvious stop to them, which I agree, because we did what we had to do. And what we had to do was, please ask the security agencies to intervene. As we speak, all those cases are under active police investigations. The DCI is investigating. So to say that nothing has been done is not accurate, but I appreciate because you do not have these details. The truth of the matter is that all the incidents that happened during the election, the by-elections, are under active police investigation.
Do you agree that some of these things that happened during the by-election could contribute to a thought or perspective then that free and fair then were not attributes of this election?
Any violence witnessed in a by-election paints an election bad. Because we have said, Article 81 clearly says that an election should be free and fair. You cannot say an election is free if people are being harassed.
So it was not free.
That is not me saying it.
You've just said
All
that we
this-
cannot say an election is free and fair if people are being harassed.
No,
Yes.
it is important that in a conversation like this, we don't box each other into a corner. What we are saying is this, that for any violence that is seen in any election process, it is not acceptable because that mars the very sanctity of an election. That is where we are. As to what exactly transpired and to what extent, so that then the level of marring may be apportioned, that is a matter under active police investigation. Any other analogous interpretation would amount to an overreach.
You know, again,
Yes.
election is a process.
Yes, it is.
Let's look at the campaign period towards this election, and we look at civil servants who ought not to be in campaign trails.
Sorry, who?
Civil servants, public officers, who ought not to be in campaign trails, seen openly. You talk about cabinet secretaries, you talk about the prime cabinet secretaries, you talk about principal secretaries who are openly seen campaigning for candidates against the law. IEBC is the custodian and the referee of elections, ensuring that everything that happens during this time is according to the law. When you see public servants campaigning for a candidate in an area, you talk about Malava, you would talk about Kasipul, you would talk about Mbere. And IEBC is silent. IEBC is not addressing itself and saying, Ola, please stop that because it's against the law. It interferes with the sanctity of elections. Why the silence?
Have you read the judgment of the commission when we were delivering our judgment in the Kasipul matter and how the commission addressed itself to that issue you're asking?
Yes, I have.
What did it say?
As you see,
No, please.
wait.
What did it say?
You condemned it. You asked public servants not to participate in these campaigns. But here's the question. It has already happened. We have seen the temerity and a lot of influence that comes with these officers during these campaigns. And the opponents have spoken and said, we feel intimidated by fact that there is government machinery out here. By allowing these to happen, the sanctity of that election, because the process, the law has not been followed, paints a picture of not free, not fair, not credible elections.
Thank you, Dennis. You see, all I'm requesting, it's a fair ask.
Yes.
That begin by acknowledging you have done something. Because where you're asking is like you've done zero. Begin by acknowledging that IBC has already in its judgment on that day condemned the use of public resources. Public resources include human and others in the campaigns. We even cited the county government of Homa Bay. You know, my brother, if you begin by appreciating what you've done, it may be little, but begin by appreciating that you did, just like she appreciated that we did penalize, but it wasn't enough. Begin by appreciating that IEBC has already pronounced itself on the use or misuse of public resources, which include public servants. In the case of Homa Bay, we said it, and we said public resources have no business being utilized in campaigns. When you acknowledge that, then as a commissioner from IBC and on behalf of the rest of the commissioners, I feel that we are partners in this journey because the media must be a partner in the journey to build and strengthen institutions of the nation. That's how we build this nation. So I get uncomfortable, I must confess, when that isn't brought to the fore because the people listening to you believe in you. They follow you. Let me finish. So begin by acknowledging the good that we've done and point out the other a lot that we haven't done, which we should readily accept, bring on board, and move on.
I ask the question: does the presence of public servants and the public funds being used in this election then taint the fairness of that election? Because public funds already have been spent, have not been recovered. We've not seen any communication or any demand that these funds be recovered. Does that taint the fairness of that election?
On what basis did we condemn We condemn the use of public resources on the basis that it does not fall in accord with Article 81. What more answer would you require from the Commission?
May I ask that with the condemnation
Yes.
of the use of these resources,
Yes.
number one,
Yes.
and the campaigning
Yes.
in these elections by public officers,
Yes.
did that stop the behavior?
The-
Did it stop the use of public resources, or did it stop the campaigning of these individuals?
From what we all saw, despite our condemnation, we did not see a zero presence
Okay.
of public officers on stage.
Right.
And this is part of what is under active police investigation.
So,
yes.
does it then say that condemnation by the IEBC of some of these activities, which are a direct abrogation of the law, then doesn't work? Condemnation on its own, where it might be an overt expression
Yes,
of
yes.
distaste,
Yes.
doesn't deter the action. Because you know what the answer was to that condemnation? They continued doing it. They continued to spend the resources. They continued to campaign in public as public officers and state officers. So what does that say then about the condemnation that you've given out?
Yes. You have a point. I have said, and I pronounced myself time without number, that the leadership in the country, in terms of our politicians, ought to understand that their actions can neuter IBC in the way it carries out its activities. Because we have clear stipulations which bar, for example, politicians from engaging in conduct that works against the very mandate that the Commission is supposed to undertake. And this is made worse by the fact that IEBC must rely on other state agencies to be able to fully execute its mandate. So it is true that when all we have to do is to condemn, because the next step, the next escalation cannot be attained without the active help of another state agency, then yes, that condemnation becomes really not as effective as would have wished.
I beg your pardon.
Yes, please.
The first word in the acronym of IEBC is independent.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I asked the question before about whether the IEBC then has the power to do certain things. That would you see a bold IEBC, and those are the words that have been used in terms of definition,
yes.
would you see a bold IEBC as the commissioners in concert coming out to say, you know what, until and unless the law is followed, we put a plug in this thing?
Oh, yes.
Is that possible?
Oh,
But
yes.
We've never seen something like that. What would it warrant for something like that to happen, where a decision is made and said, you know what, until and unless everybody's behaving, not according to what Alutalala wants, but according to what the law says, until that happens, we plug this thing.
Thank you. That is where we are headed. If this was a litmus test for IBC, I can assure it's going to be a litmus test for everybody in this country. Because if we don't play by the book, if we don't play by the law, we'll not manage this country. So there must come a time when we'll say, this must stop. In Kasipul, we said the violence must stop.
But it didn't.
I'm coming to that. What led to it, for example? Elected members of parliament are moving from one polling station to another polling station. When Regulation 62, 63 do not allow any other person other than accredited agents and observers and the media and election officials to go into those polling stations.
And the regulation is law.
It is law.
The regulation is law.
Yes.
So if you do something outside of that regulation, are you breaking the law?
You're breaking the law.
So what happens to people who break the law?
Precisely. Those people have to face the law.
But we are
Yes.
We've not seen the arrest of one person who was moving from, and it is, I'm sorry, Commissioner, but there's some things here that are clear as day. ABC, very clear. You've just said the regulations state 1, 2, 3. And I asked you, are the regulations law? Yes. In Kenya, if there is an abrogation of the law or the law has been broken, there are things that happen.
Indeed.
And these are not fairy tales. They were seen.
Yes.
They were recorded. There's a global media summary of things that happened across, even in the Magarini that you talk about, where everything was peaceful, which from that media summary, it was not as peaceful as you say. Hang on. If these things are seen, and according to you again, that this is breaking the law, elected members of parliament should not be moving from one polling station to the next. And you see this. What investigation is needed to say, let there be a censure of this individual, let them be arrested? What would be needed to deal with that issue?
Thank you. What is needed is for the police to do their work.
So the police are not doing their work.
My question is, even as we talk, as we call upon the police to do their work, remember that on election day, you also have police officers who are seconded to IEBC and become electoral officials, right? During that time.
2 officers per
polling station. And when you talk about these members of parliament moving from one polling station to the other polling station, we have police officers there who are to ensure that security is there and that the law is followed. At that particular point, why didn't we see the police then move in to arrest this individual if at all they were breaking the law?
Thank you. You may not have seen. And by the way, I will be keen for you to give me the details of Magarini. I will be keen.
Okay.
Just give me the details of Magarini. In many instances, which you may not have seen, because what is covered is that which is really hype. You don't see where something has been done well, you don't see. In many police stations, in many polling stations, the 2 officers who were assigned there, under the direction of the polling officials, were able to eject most of these officials. In Magarini, the MP for Kilifi South went into a polling station. He was ejected. There is that clip. And he was not only ejected by the police, the citizens joined in.
The people ejected him. Yes.
They ejected him. So it is not true to say that nothing is being done. What we are saying is that there is a culture among some of our leaders which is making the work of IBC look like IBC is so bad that it's never done anything good. And that is what I'm saying, that you must also be fair to us. When the one political party decides now to come up with a new cadre of officials called super agents, complete with the badge. And there's not only one super agent. They have another super agent, complete with the badge. And these super agents are elected members of parliament. These elected members of parliament move from one polling station to another, and this is eliciting animosity from the opposing crowds. This is contrary to the law. In Magarini, we ejected several. In other areas, several ejected. This will not see it because it's not hype. But the long and short of this, and which I emphasize, that the peacefulness of our elections will be predicted on a joint effort between IBC and all the sectors, but most importantly also with the citizens.
Okay.
Because if we do something nicely, but other people come in and do such wrong things, whatever little we have done well is just overshadowed. And you can see that in your own commentaries here.
For the citizens, most of the time it is said, piga kura, nenda subiri results, nyumbani. But that clearly doesn't seem to be applying to the political class. Perhaps something that IEBC needs to deal with. But let's go to Mbeere North. Mbeere North, there have been a lot of questions on the person who ran for that office, Wamudende. And EACC came out clearly with its report and saying this individual should not run because of because of suspicion that he is not a clean person. There is corruption allegations against him. And with that report, this person was cleared to run for office. Question is, if IEBC, I'm hoping and I think is in charge of ensuring that Kenyans get the best and cleanest people there are in this country to serve and represent them in parliament and in these offices, why then clear someone who has a taint on their name?
The regulation...
Does EACC report in any way hold water when it comes to clearing candidates to run for office?
The Elections Act and the regulations, particularly the regulations, when it comes to how a candidate may be cleared, stipulates that a candidate will submit a self-declaration form. This form is normally submitted to the EACC. Mm-hmm. And then if EACC has an objection which indicts this fellow that he may not be cleared, that report ought to be brought to IEBC. I must confess that I've heard so much about this, but if it has come to the IEBC, I do not know.
If what has come to the IEBC?
That report.
The report by IEBC.
Okay. IEBC
By
did not
EACC.
know that EACC had raised a question about the candidate in Berry North?
I'm saying there is no report from EACC that I have seen which is objecting to the clearance of this candidate, or better still, which is raising issues that are objectionable to the clearance of this candidate. If there is, I'll be glad to see it.
Does IEBC write to EACC requesting for report from these individuals? And if IEBC wrote to EACC, what report did you get against Wamudende?
No. IEBC does not solicit reports from EACC. What the regulations require is that every candidate must submit a form which has been submitted to EACC, and it is then expected that, because that form, the candidate indicates the purpose for which that form is being filled. That form is stamped by EACC, evidencing that indeed EACC is in receipt of that application by the candidate that he's seeking to be elected. Now, if then EACC has, under its mandate, established that there is anything about this candidate we should bar him or her from being cleared by IEBC, that then ought to be brought to the attention of IEBC. So I repeat that if that report is there, I'm not saying it's not there. If it's there, then it's not known to me.
Okay.
So if I bring a self-assessment with stamps saying that I've been cleared by EACC, doesn't it then abhor IEBC to call EACC to find out if even the stamp was real?
Dennis, now you want IEBC to engage in fishing expeditions all over. What does the law say? The law does not say that when a candidate brings a stamped form from EACC, then IEBC should write to EACC. That's not what the law says. And by the way, this happens in all public appointments. When you are looking for a public appointment, state office, public office, and you're going for an interview, it is the same procedure.
Okay, can I ask it? I seem to ask things differently. Maybe we'll get it
I wouldn't know if there is any other. Please, please enlighten me.
How does the IEBC clear candidates to then participate in an election? How does that happen? What's the process?
Under the regulations, what IEBC needs to establish is that, number one, this candidate has not had any conviction of an election offense. There's no evidence there was any election offense committed. This candidate must be a registered voter, for instance. This candidate must have been a citizen for a particular time, for instance. Those are basically the prescriptions of what we look at before the candidate is cleared.
Okay.
Yes.
So you don't look for anything else. So if there was a report that maybe didn't necessarily come to IEBC, which interestingly enough, EACC has a report on the unsuitability of Wamudende as a candidate for the Berry North.
Please share with me that report.
I will. So if this is the case, what we're saying is that any Tom, Dick and Harry so long as they're a registered voter, so long as they have not been convicted of an election offense, and so long as they've been a citizen of the country for a number of years, according to you, they can actually submit themselves, and IEBC, with nothing else, will take them on. That's what you've just said.
That's a very extremist approach.
But you've just said those three things.
No. But nothing.
Did you say
else.
something else?
Nothing else. What I have said is, because we must put it in context. The context of your question is whether this particular candidate was cleared with the full knowledge that there was a report from EACC that could have barred this candidate. Let's make it
was it
focused. I have said I have not seen.
So you don't know?
I have not seen that report.
So it's possible that we're looking at the clearance of a candidate to run in an election without the full knowledge of a clean slate by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We think, from what you're saying, that it's possible that IEBC allowed this candidate to run without full knowledge of all their activities before presenting themselves as a candidate.
The candidate.
Is it possible, Commissioner?
The candidate qualified under the requirements of the law.
Commissioner, is it possible that this individual ran and won in this election without the knowledge of the IEBC, that there is possibility that he was involved in certain activities that would be contravening to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission regulations?
But that would be applicable to every other candidate.
Is it possible, Commissioner?
That would be applicable to every other candidate.
Commissioner, is it possible that this individual was cleared without the knowledge? I'm not speaking about everybody else. I'm speaking about this individual. Is it possible? It's a yes or no. Is it possible?
It cannot be a yes and no. Because
it's possible that he was cleared without the knowledge that there might be cases against him.
The reason why you are speaking about this candidate is because you have a particular information which we are relying on. So you cannot talk of a possibility or an impossibility in respect of something you do not apply rules that are uniform to everybody else.
So,
the rules that apply to this Wamudende guy are the same rules that apply to the others.
So, Commissioner, question
if there is no information,
we may not get the answer to this question,
yes,
but there is a possibility that IEBC cleared this gentleman, and there is information that could easily be gotten from EACC that he shouldn't have been cleared for an election.
My answer is straight. I do not know why you wouldn't take it. We had no information that you are
IEBC
bringing
doesn't
to
know.
me,
Okay.
And therefore this candidate was cleared like every other candidate on the basis of
Commissioner,
qualifications.
what happens? Because fine, he came with a list, with a checklist that he had been cleared and is good to go as per the regulations. What happens if today you get a report that this man had a tainted background, yet he ran for office? Where does that place IEBC?
Whatever is not within your knowledge cannot be imputed against you.
Can he be disqualified?
After every election, IEBC becomes functus officio in law. Functus officio means that that particular issue moves to a different forum. And that is why a dispute arising from an election during and before the election is the precinct of IBC. Thereafter, it cannot be the precinct of IBC because that becomes now the issue of the petitions of court. That is the law.
But a commissioner,
yes,
as a Kenyan,
yes,
one would hope that if you talk about a multi-agency approach, having police, EACC, and judiciary, everyone working together to ensure that individuals that are running for office are clean, that if I, Dennis Aseto, come in with a checklist, having said that I have a stamp from EACC, that IEBC, one would hope, would even go further and speak with EACC because it is one government. All these agencies are in place to work for the people of Kenya, to just ensure that each and every single individual running for office, Msafi, Kamapamba. Because today, Bwana Commissioner, if a report from EACC lands on your desk that one Mr. Wamudende ran for office with taint behind him, how do you explain to Kenyans that IEBC worked for them, that IEBC assured the people of Mbeere that the individual they voted in office is deserving to be there, yet he is not?
Dennis, I want you to tell me whether on the basis of the information before IEBC, IEBC violated the law.
It depends on what information was before IEBC.
What was before IEBC?
All information was before IEBC, except what you are telling me that was before IEBC. It wasn't before
How
IEBC.
convenient that
Yes.
everything else except this was before IEBC. Come on, Commissioner, come on. What are we looking at here?
It may be convenient or inconvenient, but you're not going to shove down somebody's throat something that was not within his or her knowledge.
Which
would
is
you?
why we're still asking the same question, which it seems a bit difficult then to be able to get the answer. Because what this does, whether we like it or not, that it could be a conversation at 9 o'clock on December 3rd, 2025, but it bears all importance on what would happen in August 2027.
Yes.
And that what you must do to instill confidence in the hearts and minds of Kenyans who depend on the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to oversee an election that is not just seen to be, but is free and fair. So when we ask these questions, it's to do just that. That to say, if you didn't know, who should know?
You know, what you are asking is whether we had this information or not. I've already answered that. And what Dennis is attempting now to tell me or to ask is, should this information come to our knowledge thereafter, what shall we do? And the answer I've said, that is functus official in as far as IEBC is concerned, and that becomes the proper province of the law enforcement.
What I asked is,
Yes.
what do you think Kenyans will say about IEBC?
I would
If
not know what
this
Kenyans
report
will
comes
say.
in, and
How would I know
how
what
does
Kenyans
that
would say?
how does that paint IEBC's image before Kenyans as a referee who ought to ensure a free, credible, and fair election?
We will give Kenyans the facts as they are, without withholding any information, and let Kenyans make their own judgment. Our assurance to Kenyans is that we will be forthright. What we know, we will say it as we know. What we have done, we will say it. And where there are shortcomings that are properly brought to our attention, we will readily make amends.
Finally,
that is what IEBC will do.
Finally, is IEBC independent?
It is.
It is?
It is independent.
So you can actually make your own decisions, you can make the rules?
We penalize Kasipul without asking anybody. That's independence. We didn't ask anybody.
Okay.
Yes.
But in this other cases where now you depend on others to fill in certain blanks, you can't demand or request certain things to be done beyond their action?
We do. We do. We have asked the police to help. We have appealed to the police. We have appealed to the political class. In my interview last time with JK Live, I appealed while I was in Magarini. And we agree that where IEBC has done, there is a level beyond which IEBC appears hamstrung, and rightly so because of the infrastructural comportment of the environment within which IEBC works.
Okay. Dr. Lutalala.
You told me about Magarini. I have no idea what... you said there was violence in Magarini, where I was, and I was waiting for the specifics.
Oh, did you not want me to send that to you later? Because our time is up now. We're at 6 minutes after 9 o'clock.
Well.
And I can duly send that
Please,
to you in terms of the summary of the report.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
There's a lot to be discussed. There's still a lot to go into. The eyes of Kenyans are on the IEBC in terms of what's going to happen. And if this was anything to go by, there are many questions that are already popping up. So let's continue having those conversations. Dr. Alutalala Mukwana is a commissioner at the IEBC, has been here with us this morning. Thank you for doing that. More conversations continue. It's 6 minutes past 9. Good morning.
You.
This is the Situation Room, the only